Very good. President Caboni, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mom. Well, good afternoon. I'm good. I got plenty of hammers. I don't need another one. So it is good to be with you all this afternoon, and I hope the start of your semester has been a productive one, and that you are enjoying the fruits of a successful summer. Hopefully productive summer, maybe for some folks.
Election campaign after one of America's most powerful unions endorsing her.
I don't know why.
So, and thank you for being here in person. We learned many lessons out of COVID, but I think the most important one for me is that we do this work because we like being part of a community, and you can't build community over Zoom, not as well as you can in person. And so thank you for taking the time to be here and be present, not just for today, but for our students as well. They need us, they need you, and I know being flexible is important. Some prefer to meet over Zoom, but the more we can do in person, I think the better. So I appreciate the turnout today. Just a couple things to set the stage, a reminder of kind of this process and why we use this process. First of all, submitting questions and me answering them. Several different reasons. And we honed this over several years with staffs on it. First, it allows folks to ask questions anonymously. So no fear of reprisals, although there's not going to be any reprisals. You don't know who asked the question. But it makes some folks more comfortable. Also allows for a bit more pointed question, which I also am thankful for. It gives me a chance to essentially answer multiple overlapping questions with an answer or two, instead of having the question asked over and over and over again. It allows me to get answers to questions that I don't actually know the answer to. There's one in here about timing of part-time faculty pay that, to be candid, I didn't know the answer to it. So it gave me some time to figure that out and some folks to help educate me. And then lastly, and this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, we avoid long soliloquies masquerading as questions, and so allows us to be efficient with our time. I will say that I intend on, in my remarks, addressing all of the topics raised in the questions, well, here we go. So the first set of topics, and there are about 9 or 10 questions here, as you can imagine, are around salary. The question asks 8 or 10 different kinds of ways around what are we going to do with salary. And so first of all, I know everyone has felt the bite of inflation. And I know that our raise pool has not kept up with inflation. That's not to say we haven't been working and trying hard, but I know that folks fall behind when we have a 2% raise pool. And at the same time, I also know the realities of what we're operating within and the constraints. So the BEC is consistently balancing trade-offs. And I want to make it clear, I am proud of the work we've done. I also know there is much more work to do. And you will remember we had this compensation study and we said we're going to make progress, and we have. We're at 90% of the benchmark bands that we created in that policy, in that study. Now, are we at 100%? No. Are we going to get there? We're going to keep working toward it. We have made intentional moves to create a salary pool in each of the years that I've been here. Now, I know during the pandemic, because of uncertainty, we did not. But I just want you to know that number one, I hear you, and I know that 2% a year is not enough. The other thing that we've done, and this is part of the decentralized budget model, is really move decision-making to the colleges. So instead of me making decisions or the provost making decisions, really enabling, along with department chairs, deans, to talk about how it is they allocate resources within their college. I also know that there are deans across this campus who have reallocated internal resources above and beyond the salary pool created centrally to adjust salaries. And there are lots of ways in which that occurs. I would encourage you, if you think you are undercompensated, tell your department chair. We've done work with folks who've been very key about what they wanted. We've responded and had retention offers to retain faculty. And I just want you to hear from me that this is a priority of the university. You heard it from me when I entered in 2017, and it continues to be important. I know it had been years since you'd had a salary increase. And so I do want to remind folks that we have a 2% pool for this year, and the Budget Executive Committee is discussing and deciding now around how that pool will be allocated. I will tell you my expectation is there will be another salary pool next year, right? But remember this as we're talking today. Every 2% salary increase costs us about $2.5 million just in salary, not benefits, not retirement. And for us to make a $2.5 million additional investment, we got to find the resources somewhere. Now, our budget is in a good spot. We are up $20 million in our budget in the past 4 years. I know it may not feel like that to you because we're actually talking about budget realities in a pretty transparent, direct way, in a way that we never did before. You'll recall I walked in the door and there were 3 people who decided what the budget was: the president, the provost, and the CFO. We have our process, finally, where you have seats at the table as a governing body, as does the staff senate. And there are administrators around the table and leadership receives recommendations. Now, do I agree and accept every recommendation along with the provost and the EVP? The answer is no. As a matter of fact, they tried to send me last year a budget that included a 0% salary pool. I sent it back because I'm committed to doing the work. And so my expectation that will continue into next year. But I do have to say, across the board, salary increases are not going to address our issues. I've been saying this since I walked in the door. Rob Hale convinced me otherwise when I walked in the door, that we must get to merit increases. It is the only way that we're going to increase in significant ways individual salaries. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean someone may get a 0% salary increase? Yes. But if you balance that with a high performer getting a 4 or 5 or 6% salary increase, doesn't that send a message to both of those individuals? And it's a message that I think you use compensation to send. Now, am I just going to do this on my own? I am not. The BEC is going to have this conversation. But if you're a high performer, and it's even included in one of these questions, essentially, I get the same salary increase as the joker down the hall that's not pulling her or his weight. Why should I keep working so hard? I think that's a good question to ask ourselves. And if I'm a high performer and I got a 4 or 5% raise every year for 3 or 4 years, would I feel justly compensated or rewarded? And I think the answer to that is better than a 2% across the board that everyone gets. So that is a conversation that I hope we have this week. Now, winter and summer faculty compensation. There are questions around why has that rate not changed in recent years? And then, there was also an additional ability for some folks when they were hired to be able to get winter teaching and summer teaching for additional pay. So this is one of the ones that is actually not something that I was familiar with. And so I'm going to ask the deans and the provosts to take a look, during the next, here's an assignment, bud, during the next several months, look at the rate that we're using to pay for winter teaching and summer teaching. Now, look, here's another thing that a decentralized budget model creates, though. Summer teaching and winter teaching is not automatic, right? That has to be a strategic decision that's made by department chairs around scheduling, made with deans around budget, made with folks in academic affairs around throughput of students. Like, do we need this to get folks finished? Is this where we need to invest our resources? And so I think that also has to be part of the conversation. Just because you want to teach a summer class doesn't mean you get to teach it. Maybe that was the case before. I don't think that's the case now. I think it has to be a strategic conversation with your department chair and with your dean, because they are managing their individual budgets, and they have to pay attention to how those resources are invested and what the return is on them. Here's the pay question I did not know the answer to. Why do part-time faculty members not receive our first paycheck until the end of September? And then it comes in February in the spring semester. So part-time faculty, for whoever asked this question, are paid on the last day of each month, just like full-time faculty. But they're paid in the fall beginning in September because the semester begins after the August payroll deadline. Now, I'm going to ask the CFO to look at that. I'll ask Susan to take a look at that. But that seems to make good sense to me. There was some concern about, well, if I did a month's worth of work and you took the class away from me, I've done a month's worth of work and didn't get compensated for it. I would hope that no dean would make that decision. It just doesn't seem like the right thing to do. I like to say our policy manual would be a lot shorter if we followed just two policies: don't be a jerk and do the right thing. And so I don't think anybody would do that. But and then in the spring semester, the semester begins after, again, the January payroll. So I wasn't familiar with that. VSIP. Lots of questions around, actually 4 questions around VSIP. The first one's around how do we determine, or did we examine the effect of this on students' ability to graduate on time? And the answer is yes, that absolutely went into the analyses. Most important for our success is our student success. And we looked at it around the fall and spring semesters, comparing them, and the number of classes and the number of enrolled students, obviously, and the number of colonnade courses dips in the spring. And so starting in the spring made sense for that reason, but it also makes sense not just related to number of courses offered, so we have fewer to cover in the spring, but you think about the way in which payout will work. And having that payout in the spring in this fiscal year, and then July 1 in next fiscal year, budgetarily, makes much more sense. And so I appreciate the question, would we reconsider that? The answer is, we spent months doing this. No, we're not going to reconsider it. You know, there are rumors that float around this place sometimes. I'm baffled at where they come from. There's a question about another round of VSIP offers to take effect July 1, made in January. So that is not true. I want you to hear from me. If you are eligible for VSIP and you are considering taking it, do not pass this one up, because there's not going to be another round in January. Just really clear about that. So I don't know where that came from, but no additional VSIPs in January. All right, academic programs. So these were actually 2 questions that, and I mean this with the utmost respect. A lot of the questions asked, and I appreciate you represent faculty, were pretty self-interested around salary, around VSIP, around things that affect faculty life, and I acknowledge that that's the purpose of being able to ask and answer these questions. You get to hear from me. But these 2 I thought were important because they're really the only 2 that focus on what external audiences think about our students and our curriculum. Kind of the most important thing we do. So the first one was around, in my interactions with community leaders, what are some aspects of our degree programs that are praised and seen as valuable? And so I do get to spend a great deal of time with folks in the community, legislators, we'll talk about that later, and other donors and folks who hire our young people. And I want to tell you to a T, they love our graduates. They feel that they're technically prepared well, that, to be candid, they would prefer to hire them over some of our in-state competition because they're less entitled. They work hard. Our curriculum has prepared them to take what they've learned in the classroom and use it in the real world. And so all the things we talk about, applied learning, experiential learning, applied research, the folks who are essentially hiring or buying our product are very pleased with that. I know our teachers are so much more well-prepared because we start them day one learning about pedagogy and instruction. So I think we're doing really well there. The second question, and I think these are, I imagine they're the same person, they're linked. What are aspects of our programs that need work? And how do you communicate what you're hearing to academic units so they can use the feedback? And first, the way I communicate that is by talking directly with provosts and with deans about what I'm hearing and trying to address issues that may come to me that I have nothing to do with, but passing them along so that if there are issues, we can intervene internally quickly to deal with that. But the major thing that we hear over and over and over again is they need more training in their soft skills, right? And so just working together with others is challenging. You can imagine if you spent high school on a computer in COVID, you all have felt this in the classroom, I'm sure, as well. I mean, I feel it when I try to make eye contact with at least some of them. I do feel like it's gotten better with this entering class of folks being able to engage more directly. So interviewing, like how do you do an interview as a place where they can use work? To be candid, some have said they don't know how to dress appropriately. And so I think as an institution, we have some work to do, some opportunity here. But I think that we're going to try to address some portion of this through our QEP. And if you've been following along, essentially the competencies that companies are looking for, a lot of times, you'll remember last year I talked about this at convocation. We talk past one another. Companies use one language. Universities talk about learning outcomes. And I think what we have to do is line these things up. And I'm hopeful that our QEP and that graduate profile will help us address some of this. But some of it is the out-of-class learning that they have to do. It's not just going to be taught in a classroom. I think we have to continue to be intentional about not just extracurricular activities, but the way in which we teach folks how to be professionals. And some parts of the university might do this more well than others, but I think it's worthy of a conversation. So then we pivot to graduate education. And I'm really excited about this conversation for our institution. So the question is around graduate education, training, and how do we push and do more recruitment at the university level? How do we adjust stipends and waivers, and how do we increase those? So some of you may know, others may not, that we have begun over the past several years under the leadership of Rob Hale, this shop called Academic Program Marketing. And they work each year to bring on board another set of programs that they support with central marketing. Now, they also have been working of late to build something called a CRM, customer relationship management process within something called Slate. This is the software they use to communicate. They're building at the central level things that work for multiple units, right? So we can scale these things. But I'm going to tell you, graduate student recruitment is not done well at the center. It just isn't. And so I know our deans have been focused on this of late. And I think it's a multi-pronged question for us. So some of you will remember that I began my academic administrative career as an associate dean. I also was a professor and have done work around creating new programs that attract interest, attract enrollment, are fun to teach because they're new. This requires choices, right? So are there things that we're going to stop doing to be able to do that? I think that's an important conversation. But I also think that we have the capacity to enroll more graduate students. We're about 2,200 now. 3,000 is the right number for us. Now, the only way you do that is by having exciting new programs and having recruitment not just happen from the center, but really engage faculty, department chairs, and central college staff. No one in the graduate school is going to convince a student to come do higher education administration and study with us. Unless maybe they're a graduate of the program. They certainly aren't going to be able to do it for engineering. That has to be a conversation that happens between college staff at the front end. But the reality is, if you're going to come get a graduate degree, especially one that's not a professional degree, one that's preparing me for a life of research, then I have to talk to faculty. And I have to understand the culture of a department. And I have to understand the philosophy of the mentor-apprentice relationship, at least at that level. And so I do think that there is work to be done. We decentralized finally. So this was crazy. So, it only took 7 years. Thank you, Provost. Why does it take forever to get our graduate, our assistantships and our stipends, right? And so this maddened me when I was an associate dean. I wanted every graduate student offer out by the end of January. And that required us doing what? Well, taking some risk, but also knowing how many slots you have each year. Not hoarding them at the center and then being slow and doling them out one or two at a time, which gets you nothing. And so we made the decision, and it's the right one, to decentralize those funds for graduate student assistantships and waivers to the deans. Those live in your colleges now. Your dean has those in front of them. And those deans have those in front of them. Sorry, I was looking at the English faculty getting nervous. And so I think that we need to go quicker. They have the flexibility to grow the amount of dollars there. When we start thinking about PhD and R2, though, here's another crucial thing for us. That is a rich recruiting ground for us to both develop talent and identify folks who have the capacity to continue on past a master's degree and maybe already have experience in one of our labs or working in our research projects. And so that's another reason I think it's so crucial. And the last is, I'm so thankful for my experience here at WKU as a graduate student. I taught 2 sections of comms each of the semesters I was here. I made $12,000, I don't know, $9,000. It was only 9-month stipend, $9,000. We should be more than that now, but not by much, I know. And at the same time, it taught me how to teach. So under the tutelage of a program head, we all got together and there were opportunities to be critiqued, and it's a great pedagogical experience for someone who eventually knew he wanted to wind up as a professor. And so I think we have to create those opportunities for our students, even if there's not a direct pathway to a PhD here for those who aspire to it. I also will tell you that it can be really good teaching for undergraduates, particularly in those courses like public speaking, which are, for many of our students, terrifying. And to have someone with whom they relate more directly sometimes eases that difficulty. So, pivoting from that and transitioning to R2, and talking about, number one, what does that mean for us? Number two, you just made that up one night, Caboni? No. And then, it didn't actually say it. It said it maybe a little bit more directly than that. And then the last is, how do we do that with our workload? And I think this is really important for us as an institution to navigate. So you know that there is a new workload policy that's been approved for the university, and it's a flexible one. And we have to have that flexibility. I think we also have to raise our sights for ourselves as faculty. Meaning, if you need some release time to be able to pursue extramural funding, you have to be willing to have that conversation with your chairs. Chairs have to have that effort conversation, from my perspective, this is what I grew up in, every year with faculty. We had effort letters that were created by department chairs that were signed off by deans that said, this year, as a faculty member, I'm going to do X. And this is essentially my contract with you, department chair, and you, dear dean. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that if I have lots of research funding and I bought myself out of grants, I can buy myself down to a minimal amount of teaching. But here's the other thing I'm going to say. if you haven't had a peer-reviewed research article in a real journal in the past 3 years, how are you saying that you're doing research? I know there's creative activity. I know there are other types of product. But I think as chairs, we're going to have that conversation and talk about what does research and creative activity mean on this campus. It's variable across departments. I can't tell you what it is for everyone. I know what it looks like from institutions where I've been and what the expectations are. And I know we've worked hard, and thank you for all of your work across our colleges to get much more clear on our tenure and promotion documents. So again, I hope as you're hearing me talk about this, you understand none of this was accidental. Putting pieces and pieces and pieces in place that really have laid the groundwork for us to have the conversation with legislators and CPE around could we offer a select number of PhD programs. So if you look at our peer set, the folks that we use both as benchmarks and compare ourselves against, if you look at the number of them that are our two institutions, it's about 3/4. Our aspirational peers, the people we want to look like, are Research 2 universities. Now, on the research side, we've set some more ambitious goals than just whatever it takes to make Carnegie's benchmark. It's $5 million. We do double that now in federal HERD funding, and we want to double that in the next 5 years. Requires the flexibility, requires the support from our grant-getting office, and we've made changes there on purpose, right, to be more supportive, more responsive, and bring some folks back and add additional help. But I want you to hear that it's who we've aspired to be for a long time. That's why those benchmarks were selected, and many of them I inherited. For our compensation to meet our benchmarks, we have to do the work that faculty at our benchmarks are doing. And so that's what the workload policy does. That's what additional research will do. And as we grow the federal research portfolio, F&A dollars, overhead, is crucial to us, not just as an institution, but to your colleges, right? Because that provides additional resources for your deans to redeploy in support of that research enterprise. And I would argue some of that needs to go to departments to also support that infrastructure. Now, I don't know what the breakdown is today, but I think we need to continue having those conversations. The next question really focuses on fundraising. So I hope you know that we wrapped up a successful $100 million mini campaign for the WKU Opportunity Fund. For those of you who participated and contributed to that, I want to say thank you. I think it's just a remarkable investment that our faculty and faculty emeriti and former faculty have invested over $6 million of that over $100 million total. But because we're wrapping that up, that gives us an opportunity to think about an academic innovation fund. How do we pursue professorships and chairs? Now, I'm going to tell you, those are the hardest dollars to raise at a university. A lot is because people like giving to what they remember, which is being a student. It's a more difficult conversation to explain how supporting a faculty member also affects students, and affects them sometimes in a very direct way, either by the seats in the lab, other experiences that you create for them for instruction or for research. So we're going to have to do work there. And the other opportunity is we're trying to leverage state dollars. So the Bucks for Brains program, which is a matching program, that is a compelling way to talk with a donor, that you essentially get 2 for 1 in terms of credit. So if you do $500,000, we'll match it with $500,000 in state funds, and you have a chair for $1 million. Or you do it at a smaller level, $50,000 from you, $50,000 from state funds, and we'll create a $100,000 professorship. As you know, universities are in a constant state of campaigning, either silent planning for or in silent phase, an active phase, a cleaning up, wrapping up phase, a collecting phase, or a planning phase again. It's just cyclical, and it never stops. And we are in the planning phase again. So this will be part of the conversation as we think about what are not just the priorities, but what thematically makes sense for us as an institution. So more on that to come. I do agree that we have to do better for graduate students and getting competitive on those packages. One of the ways we do that is by when we put federal grants in, and I've had this conversation with Jenny, is we have to think we're worth it, right? And even if it's your first grant, you gotta buy out, right? You gotta buy your time out in the fall and spring semesters. You gotta pay yourself 2 summer months. And you have to build into every grant the graduate student support that you need at a price that makes sense. There are dollars available. We just need to make sure we're maximizing the opportunities, right? And so that requires being intentional about that and in that conversation and planning for grant-funded work. But it also requires some self-worth to say, hey, my time is valuable. And so we're going to ask for what we actually need to do this work. I've watched junior faculty not value their time or effort, be successful at getting grants, and kill themselves because they didn't buy out. And so we have to avoid that at all costs. The same thing with getting the needed hands on the pump, right? So I was co-PI of a national center, a $10 million national center. And trust me, we had our faculty salaries paid for. Now, where I was, you couldn't buy out of everything. You had to teach 1-on-1, one graduate, one undergraduate, because we had to maintain quality instruction. I think we may have more flexibility here depending upon the conversation with your dean. And then we had a cadre of PhD and MED students working on those projects. And so I think that's a way for us to be successful. This is not a light switch, as I said at convocation. It's a process. And it's an important process for us as a university, a process that's been underway for a long time. We talked about this with deans. We talked about, why would you want to do this? Why R2? You said, Caboni, we're a regional institution. We are. Regional institutions can be R2 institutions. They can be. As a matter of fact, we're surrounded by them. If you look at Ball State, MTSU, every state around us has an R2 designated university except for Kentucky. And that was compelling for our legislators. The question, why now? Because the conversation started around additional postgraduate opportunities in the state. And it was perfect time to strike, and we have support in the legislature. As of today, the law doesn't even contemplate the possibility of an R2 for Kentucky. It just doesn't. The door is slammed shut, locked, and it keeps us from, to be candid, competing with that blue place and that other red place. Not accidental. But the other question is, should everyone be able to do this? So in our conversation with CPE that is ongoing, and they have an outside group, Deloitte is working with them, how do they decide who's ready and who's not? What is the capacity that a place needs to have? And what are the resources available? So one of the reasons we have a strategic investment fund is to have freed up resources for this kind of work. The other reason it's important is that we are unlike any of the, and today I will say other comprehensives, eventually I will say the comprehensives, is that we already do double the nearest amount of research from any of those institutions. And there are other places, including ones who don't like to help out with their jersey choices, that do almost no sponsored research. I'm talking $700,000, right? So we're not like them. The legislature understands that, CPE understands that, but they want to avoid, obviously, the proliferation of these. So that's another reason. It's good for our reputation. You all know that I have a background in public affairs and led marketing. Differentiating is something we have to do every day to convince people why here and not there against every competitor institution. And R2 is just another differentiation point. Growing, again, F&A, and total research dollars creates a budget flexibility for deans and chairs, and that's important. I think it changes how we see ourselves in one way, meaning more research. But because we're still undergraduate focused, it just expands the research opportunities for our undergraduates. Now, at the same time, I floated some ideas for what the first PhD programs might be. The first one was data sciences, big data, data analytics, informatics, all that stuff, kind of AI, all combined into one thing. I'm a higher education policy guy. I can say stuff because that's what it all goes together, I think. So in those narrow areas, yes, you're going to have PhD programs, and the research hopefully will be at a level where undergraduates can do the beginning parts, but you're going to need PhDs students to work in a lab. And some of them may aspire to work as professors one day, and that's wonderful. But here's the other opportunity, and this became really clear during the course of conversations with the chamber and local leadership. We cannot bring another 2,000 job manufacturing plant to Bowling Green. We don't have the electricity to support it, number one. Spent time with TVA this summer. We're challenged. They're working on ways and workarounds, but it's going to be years away. We also have more jobs than you can fill in manufacturing anyway, 5,000 open manufacturing positions. Since I arrived, I've been beating the drum that we need jobs that require 4-year degrees to retain our students here, or master's degrees. We need more of those kinds of jobs to avoid that giant sucking sound you hear every May as folks go to the hottest, most fun city in the country. Eventually they realize living 4 people to a room is not worth it for as much fun as it sounds, and they hopefully will want to come back. But we finally got traction. Because of all of those limitations, with local leadership, we finally have alignment between the chamber, economic development organizations, the mayor, and the county judge executive around not just the Innovation Campus initiative, but around R2, because they know we have to diversify our economy to keep growing. Finally. And they're going to be willing not just to partner, but to invest. I want to thank Senator Givens and the legislature. I've got a $10 million fund that we can use designed for the Innovation Campus, but also can be used programmatically around it as well. So as these conversations evolve, I think that's why R2. Because it's our moment, it's our shot, right? And we've been talking about growing our research enterprise for so long, we should take it. I'm going to pivot to childcare. And this one was essentially saying our offering of childcare to faculty staff is non-existent. Why is this the case? So did some digging. We have a range of services. We have an on-campus childcare center. Y'all know this? Yeah. Okay. Good. This person did. And I know the seats may be limited. We have had other conversations around other locations where we might provide childcare. So understand there is also significant liability around that, and so it is a balancing act. But I do think it's a conversation for us to have beyond what we offer today, and I know those conversations have been occurring. I won't preview that for you because we're not there yet. But in addition to that, we do offer the Dependent Care Flexible Spending Account, which allows you to avoid some taxation on that for child care expenses. And, I do appreciate that for families, it's a tough issue, right? I also am hopeful that as we learned out of COVID, there are ways to have flexibility around taking care of your families. And so this is a conversation more important perhaps for staff, but you have academic staff. As faculty, you have ultimate flexibility in your lives. I hope you find that valuable. I think faculty have an easier time, maybe not full-time childcare at home, obviously, but being able to balance some of that too. So, connected to benefits, questions around health insurance. We get 1% raises, but the health insurance increases by more than this every year. So it's actually a pay cut. Are you invested in improving this? So a reminder. Number one, we had a 2% salary pool. For the past 5 years, the university did not increase your health care contribution. Nobody remembers this. Nobody remembers it. What did we do as an institution? We absorbed the burden for you. And nobody talks about it, and almost no one acknowledges it. So I'm going to remind everyone, we didn't increase your health care for 5 straight years, both because of the COVID uncertainty and because of inflation. And I'm sorry this person got a 1% raise. Maybe they deserve it. Not in a mean way. You're going to have to get comfortable with that. You're going to have to get comfortable with that. But I do want to talk to you about health care, because this is going to be a continuing issue for our university. It should be part of our national conversation, but another topic for another day. So we actually worked with Mercer to do an analysis to look at cost savings, or whether or not we should be self-insured, should we go someplace else. Kentucky State went to the state system. Economically, it's not viable. We asked last year CPE to consider creating a partnership or a pooled effort for us to reduce kind of liability. CPE was not interested in taking on the endeavor at that time. I will raise that again because as of today, our health care plan is competitive. So before we make any changes, the 5-year national increase in health benefits cost was 6%. And for the same 5-year period, our annual health increase in plan cost was 3.8%. So we're actually doing well as a self-insured plan. Eric, you and I have had this conversation. I appreciate the vitality time that folks put in every August to make sure they get their tokens, right? Their points. I do the same thing. I'm not giving them I don't have an Apple Watch, my phone, but making sure you get the points necessary. I was skeptical. I asked them to show me the data. It actually works. There are people who get their rings Susan Hollworth is obsessive about it. They're getting their rings closed every day. So we're doing a good job keeping ourselves relatively healthy, because remember, every time we get sick, that comes out of our pocket. But what's driving this? Well, in 2023, we're 21% less than Anthem's college university benchmark. So we have 6 other universities in something called Know Your RX coalition. Our drug costs are right in the middle of the pack. The high deductible health plans and the 2 preferred provider plans. Family contributions are a little bit higher. Individual contributions are lower. We're generally in line, but are higher in benchmarks for the high deductible plans. The university covers 83% of the cost. Employees cover the other 17%. But what's driving this is COVID, long COVID, post-COVID, delayed treatment during COVID, which increased the need for treatment. People got sicker because they couldn't go or didn't want to go to a doctor. Long haul claims, and there also is a little bit of an increase in elective procedures, just because they were delayed. All of this affects the cost, and we addressed with the benefits committee. They didn't want to make any changes. That was the recommendation they sent to the leadership just a week or so ago. So we're going to have a conversation around sharing that cost burden, but we're also going to have to take a look at the plans and see if there are other ways for us to mitigate this. Because when you think about just this year's budget is $4 million larger than last year's budget. If our increased health care costs are $2 million year over year, and we spent $2.5 million on a salary increase, none of the other benefits. That's 4.5. You do the math. That's a $500,000 cut without doing anything else. And so that's another reason that I'm thankful for the BEC and the process that we have. So folks, these conversations all used to happen behind a closed door. And I know I had the same conversation. There's a trust issue. That trust issue built up over years. I know some people don't trust the BEC and that it's a transparent process. We are maturing as a university with good conversations with folks who understand the finances of this place and the way in which they work. They're making smart, strategic conversations. So it also means our finances are more public and the choices are more visible to you as faculty and for our staff. And that's okay. They should be. I want to make clear today, there was a question around furloughs. And look, we all live, many of us lived through spring of 2018. Never, ever want to do that again. And so there are no plans for any furloughs. The reason we are where we are is because along the way we continue to make difficult choices. And I wish I could tell you higher education in the 21st century was going to go back to what it was. You know the demographics, and if you don't, I'm going to tell you about them because it's part of the questions here. But you also know states are having conversations. You know what our state revenue, which has been up. And look, I'm thankful for what the legislature has invested in us in the past several years. So we have grown our tuition revenue. We have had a little bit across the board from the state legislature. They've made significant investments on the capital side, both on asset preservation and 2 new huge construction projects that have been desperately needed on this campus for years. But you also know the percentage of our budget that comes from Frankfurt makes us completely tuition dependent. You know the competition that we face. You know the background and demographic of the students we typically enroll. A third of our students, first generation students, third low income, who are very price sensitive. And so we have to continue paying attention to them because all of it affects essentially the bottom line. So the athletics budget shortfall. Eric, you were in the Herald. Is somebody going to be held accountable? Right? I actually read the Herald. Price? Yes. Price is the... So, what the BEC does is actually creates that conversation. Right? So, if you're over, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to have to explain what happened. And I will tell you more in a broad way in a second what's happened over time with budgeting on this campus. You're going to explain what the plan is to fix it, rectify it, and not be over. And number 3, you're going to have to figure out how you pay that back. So all of that happens in that context. And so as we mature as an institution, we got to know that we have to have real budgets. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with what the college budgets used to look like on this campus. They had no relationship to expenditures. They hadn't been changed in decades, or at least a generation, right? So what am I going to do? I'm just going to do a transfer. I'm going to shift dollars from here to there to everywhere. You know what that makes impossible? Doing strategic budget planning. And so for the past several years, and this is what decentralized budgeting has gotten us, and what Axiom allows us to do, is say our budgets have to have a relationship to our expenditures year over year. Why? Because that allows for good planning. It allows us to hold ourselves accountable. We couldn't do this before. People got a Post-it note with a number not to go over. That's crazy for a $500 million organization. And so we've gotten there in many of our units. And to our deans, kudos, because they have done yeoman's work to make that happen. And it allows us to do year-over-year expenditure comparisons, but also do a deep dive at a unit level and tells you where those expenditures, overspends, underspends may be occurring, right? And it allows for an earlier intervention. Athletics hadn't gotten there yet. They have a new CFO. The reason they have a new CFO, who finally has that in place. And I'll give you an example. Bowl game. Now, there's revenue associated with a bowl game, but there are also expenses associated. It usually balances out a little bit extra to the university. We had $100,000 for a bowl game in the expenditure budget. We know it's $1 million. Why? Because we just never changed the budget. And so we finally have an athletics budget that matches. And then the other thing that I will say, athletics is different from an academic unit because they have so many different sources of revenue. And so you have to be accurate and honest about what those look like and account for them. So you think about ticket sales, you think about marketing dollars, you think about fundraising, you think about NIL. It's outside right now, but you know the world is changing. All of those in addition to a student fee, which has been declining. If you don't have an accurate budget and an accurate accounting, it's easy to make mistakes. I will tell you, our athletic director owned it, accepted the responsibility, going to fix it. Can't happen next year. He knows that. So, ramp. The question is, and I'll paraphrase it, are we ever going to get in the black, right, with ramp? And the answer is, we're already experiencing the flexibility that the model creates. So, for the first time since the implementation, the participation fee this year provided funding for subvention. This is all technical stuff, so I'm going to get it right. With additional funding available for strategic initiatives for each college as determined by the dean and the provost. What does that mean in English? It means that each one of your deans has a small bit of money, about $250,000, up to $300,000-ish, to use for internal strategic investments. So there's money. The more we continue to be disciplined and conservative and prudent, the more money we will have to reinvest. And that means holding one another and ourselves accountable. And again, I do think the BEC continues to do that. So here's the other thing the budget model does. It allows these conversations not to happen in a vacuum. So when we talk about enrollment and enrollment management and the scholarship model and consultants, and I'll get to that in a minute, who's around the table now? Because there was a question at the end that they told me not to address directly, but I'm going to. Is the person who hired the consultant, shouldn't they lose their job? Why is it ever one person hiring the consultant is the real question we should be asking. The answer is it isn't anymore. So who's around that table? You have your deans around that table. You have your professional staff around the table. You have academic leadership around that table, right? You have budget around the table. I sit at the table sometimes just to ask people hard questions. And so what does that mean? It means that your voices through your deans are being heard in both the selection of and management of that relationship. So it's true for recruitment and enrollment, and I'm so thankful the work that you and your deans are doing, going out on the road and recruiting students. We were out in Murfreesboro and Franklin and Lexington and Louisville this week. Those will continue. I'm thankful for the work that they're doing around budget. Right? So these are strategic budget conversations that are not held in some star chamber, right? They actually have input and contributions. And so that's what we've done by decentralizing, is by providing skin in the game to everyone. So it's not just me and Bud and Susan pulling policy levers. Because I should never be the one, nor should they, pulling policy levers for colleges, and certainly not for departments. Now, financial aid. And this is an important question, and it's absolutely spot on. Growing financial challenges, regional universities expending, declining enrollment, reduced state funding. What strategies are being considered? I hope you all read the Chronicle of Higher Education. It's a horror show for regional universities. Not here. And I got a note today from one of your deans saying, this gives me hope for where we are. I'm like, yeah, because we've been doing the hard things for the past bunch of years. Why? Because everybody's been talking about the demographic cliff for 15 years. So yeah, are we ready? We are. And if you think about the moves we made, none of them were accidental. They were all intentional and strategic to get us to this place. So we are focusing not on a headcount number. And do this respectfully. But a 20-year focus on 20,000 students creates perverse incentives around counting, around aspirations, and does nothing to manage the budget. Nothing. So what are we doing now? We're intentionally leveraging and focusing not on headcount growth. You can buy headcount growth. You all know that's what I walked into here, right? Sure, we're going to get bigger, and we're going to spend a heck of a lot of money, and our discount rate's going to go up, but we're not going to have the revenue to do what we should have with that number of students. Oh, and by the way, we're going to count in weird ways that it really wasn't even close anyway. And so what we're doing now is net tuition revenue focus. We have got to change this campus's mindset around headcount. So you're hearing so-and-so's up, so-and-so's up. I'm going to tell you, we're about flat in terms of our first year class. But we're up in revenue. And why are we going to be up in revenue? Because the tweaks we're making to our scholarship model. That we know that Kentucky as a state has a declining population in the age cohort. It's becoming more diverse. So less of the typical students who go to college are in the pipeline. And so supporting students from a variety of backgrounds, every background is important. But what's even more important is knowing how fortunate we are. Warren County and Bowling Green, the fastest city and county in the state. And I never would have thought this 30 years ago as a graduate student, but we are now considered a suburb of Nashville. We're Nashville North. And in Franklin and south of Nashville, Spring Hill, which isn't even Nashville, but Spring Hill, they see us as just as an attractive choice as MTSU. And we compete against the University of Tennessee. Austin Peay is harder because the Hope Scholarship works there. It's why we did the Border State Scholarship. A third of our entering class is from out of state this year. That number must continue to shift. I want more Kentucky kids. Any additional kid we can get, young person, not young person, adult learners, online learners, but we have to do it in such a way that it affects not head count, but net tuition revenue. And so we're continuing to tweak scholarships. If we had not done the new scholarship model, we would be in a really difficult place. I also think we have to continue talking to leaders, not just in the county, but in the Commonwealth, for us to be successful as a state, for our region to be successful and continue its momentum. Everyone needs something after college. A certificate, a technical degree, a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, a high school diploma is not enough to create economic stability for a family any longer. So we have to do better at convincing our community of that. And I think continuing to leverage the partnerships with Bowling Green and Warren County will be helpful. I also think we have to continue the work we've done on our academic program mix. You remember when what was it called? I want to say what it was called. We went through and we looked at what we're going to stop doing so we could do other new things. That we're on now a review cycle. It's every 5 years, not whenever we think of it or when things get bad. That we continually look at our programs and think, do we have the right mix? Because look, we can do anything we want as a university. There are the resources for that. but we can't do everything we want. So we have to make choices. And some of that is hard choices about what we're going to stop doing. We're going to do it in a way we maintain our character, who we are, what's important to us. But if you have a program, I was the associate dean that had these conversations with department chairs and program heads. If you have a program that enrolls 5 people, is that viable? With multiple faculty members? The answer is no, it's not viable. I don't care how much service instruction you do. And for my colleagues in Potter, you want majors. You don't just want to teach colonnade courses, right? You want a vibrant intellectual environment. Some of our areas have hundreds of students. Some of them either have to adapt or choose not to adapt and deal with the consequences that come with that. So I think we have to do that. And I think we've done a much better job. And Rob, thank you for leading what is sometimes a painful effort to do that. And to everybody who works with Rob, thank you for being kind-ish to him. Why are departments getting penalized for the mismanagement of funds from other sources? Departments are not getting penalized for other units overspending. Anybody who overspends is going to pay that back. And they're going to present a plan to the BEC. I've already kind of said that. Why are you building buildings and increasing our debt load? Okay. So the renovation of Cherry Hall will come from preservation dollars. The business school, $75 million of which came from the state academic complex, our largest capital appropriation also from the state. We've already have $9.5 million in pledges for the College of Business building. For the first time in 15 years, because of inflation, the cost of the project came in over the estimates. And so we are going to have to take on a little bit more debt. But, again, if you know anything about me, I'm fiscally conservative. 2014, our debt load was at $200 million. We're going to tick up a little bit in 2026, 2027. That will require $2 million more to our debt, to our credit card payment. And we're going to do that through fundraising. We essentially pretty much have that covered. In fall of 2028, the university's debt load will come down to $100 million total, from a high of 200. That's the work that we want to do, right? So for those of you who are concerned, don't be. There's a plan. We're going to get to $100 million, and we're going to keep chipping away at it. Am I going to say that we're never going to take out debt? No, that's a goofy thing. But we're going to continue working on it. Another question around it, the baby recession, the cliff, I think I answered that. But I'm thankful we're here and not other places of the state. We can't hold consultants accountable. Why don't you? We do. We fired some. I don't make news with it. I don't put out a news release. But if you don't deliver, we hold you accountable, you get gone. And we've done that. And I will say that I'm really pleased with where we are with our new partners, and that we continue to take input around the scholarship model. So again, I've already talked about our legislature and our community, but I do think there's a political aspect to this too. If where you get your news, all you hear about is indoctrination at universities, and that you never make, and you leave with $100,000 in debt over and over and over again, and that's the only place, it's the only channel that you have where you get your information. And yeah, I wouldn't send my kid to college either, especially if it's not indoctrination that I agree with, right? It's some other kind of indoctrination. And they're never going to get out from this burdensome debt. And so we have to get back to a reality-based conversation. The problem is this is not a rational conversation with our stakeholders. It is political, and we just have to continue to fight it. But you know the world we live in. That is an uphill battle these days to live in a fact-based reality versus whatever else is getting thrown around here. But it's not just here. This is a national issue. You think about the Gallup poll that I referenced in convocation. We just have to be more persuasive and not stop fighting. The provost will use the example that on average, our students leave with $25,000 in loan debt. Half of our students leave with zero debt. And over a lifetime, the return on that $25,000 for an average student, like a speech and rhetoric major, is $1.2 million. If you do engineering, $2 million. I will take a $2 million return on a $25,000 investment every day of the week. But our families, some portion of our families either don't understand or don't believe that. And we have to just keep fighting to crack that nut. But I am proud, because our audience is so price sensitive, that we have done a good job maintaining affordability. You could do the University of Miami model, but it changed who we are as a university in a way that it does not fit with our opportunity and access mission. So when you look at the trends, we gotta keep partnering. So somebody asked about 2% raise over the year, and I appreciate our Herald. I said I was proud of the BEC's work to have a 2% raise pool for the past 4 years. That meeting is on YouTube, if you want to go check it out, at minute 14 minutes and 55 seconds. Since 2019, we've increased salaries 6 times, including 4 across-the-board raises for all of our eligible employees. So in 19, a 2% cost of living, 2% merit discretionary pool. Then we had COVID. January 1, 22, 1.5% across the board. April 1 of 2022, we did post-compensation adjustments up to $10,000 to get folks into the right pay bands. January 1, 2023, 2% across the board. January 31, 2023, a $950 one-time discretionary bonus. January 1, 2024, 1% across the board, 1% discretionary divided by the divisions. This January, 2% pool again. 2025, 2% pool. I know it didn't keep up with inflation. I get it. But we have to be honest with ourselves. Matt may remember my first visit to Faculty Senate as a new president, and I talked about how giving raises and reducing the budget. And you can do it. It requires trade-offs, and it's hard. And we've managed to continue to do it. Now, we didn't get 2 and 2, and that was a tough year, but this is a conversation now that is not just me saying, yes, we have to do it. It's a conversation that happens in the BEC. So some of you, this is about DEI. Some of you may have paid attention to the interim joint committee on education that gathered in Frankfurt on Tuesday from 11 to 1:30, where the vast majority of time was spent with the University of Kentucky and then the University of Louisville, asking about diversity, equity, inclusion on our campuses. And I had the opportunity to share with our legislators the work that we've been doing since 2020. So DEI is perceived in one way on one side of the political spectrum. And what I explained to them is that we don't have a DEI office. We've never had a DEI office since I've been president. We don't even have a 1 WKU office. We have a 1 WKU effort. And that effort, I want everyone in this room or read the coverage of this to hear from me, 1 WKU is what we're committed to as a university because it's broad. We have individuals across our campus who are committed to that. Molly on the academic affairs side, Michael Crow on the student side. Intentionally did not have a vice president for diversity. You know why? Because that takes responsibility off of everybody else's shoulders. And this is work that requires the entire community, all faculty and all staff members working to ensure that every student that we enroll succeeds, no matter their background. Not some, but every student, because every one of them matters. No matter their geographic background, their age, their education level, the language they speak, experience food insecurity, socioeconomic status, political views, first generation, marital status, gender identity, sexual orientation, neurodiversity, ability, disability, military status, religion, culture, and yeah, ethnicity or race. Doesn't matter. If you want to pursue a college degree at WKU, we will do everything in our power to make it possible for you and to foster a sense of belonging here on our campus. The support work that we've done, and look, you all know the numbers. Underrepresented minority retention has gone up 16 plus points. What we're doing is working. We're not going to stop supporting students. Our overall retention rate up 8.1%. First generation students up over 7% just in the past 2 years. First generation, because of the first generation initiatives, up over 4%. It works. It works. And it's not indoctrination or ideology or woke. And so I want to make sure we continue that work, and I'm committed to it. Here are the three that, it's why we do it anonymously, so people can say whatever they want. Why should we have confidence or trust in your leadership with respect to the budget? If Susan can't do this, why does she have her job? Why you, Tim Caboni, do not understand the basis of economics and how to properly handle a budget problem. So I'm going to answer all of those this way. Number one, Susan's budget came in millions of dollars under budget. Trust me, she knows how to manage a budget. President's office underspent this year, right? We walked into a potentially $40 million budget hole in 2017. Closed. We were using carry forward, the worst budgeting tool, trick in higher education. And folks, today, we have no carry forward in this budget. I've done what needed to be done. We've managed to have raise pools. Our enrollment is generating net tuition revenue. I know what it feels like compared to inflation. But look around the country. We are in a tremendous spot. We need to keep our work up. We need to keep being disciplined. We need to keep working together. And so I'm going to end with this at the 5 o'clock hour. Tell me what you want to work on together, and we'll do it. Since I've been here, I've asked this question over and over again. I've only gotten it answered once. It was Lauren McLean who said to me, I want to do parental leave. You know what we did? We worked together, including me, nudging a bunch of people, and we made it happen. So please, think about what you want to accomplish together. The provost is ready and willing. Your deans are ready and willing. And we can move this place forward even further. So believe it or not, I actually enjoy coming to visit with you. I know sometimes the questions are personally painful. That's okay. That's why I'm president. I want you to hear from me that I'm committed to you, committed to this place, and I'm proud of the work that we're doing together, and I thank you for sometimes your forbearance, for knowing that we're not going to agree on everything, but for trusting that no one on my team and I never make a decision that we don't think is in the best interest of the university, ever. It's not about hurting people. It's not about making things difficult. It's about making the place better and ensuring that what we're doing is sustainable in a chaotic, difficult environment. So thank you for the opportunity. I believe I answered all, including things that were hard to answer, and I appreciate the opportunity. Go Tops!